episode of Oops All Dragons. I'm Lisa.
I'm Faerun.
And we've got something very fun. Classes in session, baby.
Our first repeat guest, I think, right?
Yeah.
Amanda.
It is such an honor to be back on. Hello.
Yeah. And it's the beginning of a potentially recurring segment we're going to have where we're going to talk about D&D lore with Professor Amanda from the Strixhaven school or whatever.
No, this is cooler than Strixhaven because there's no test. You don't have to...
Oh, well, come on. Their tests usually entail, like, fighting a giant monster or something. Like, come on. That could be cool.
Should we include, like, a little reading comprehension, like, multiple choice?
There might be some recommended reading, but I don't have any Scantrons with me.
Yeah. Do you have your number 2 pencils?
Yeah.
Or are you... Is this Euphoria high and everybody just comes in a little mini handbag that you've got? It's just some... I don't know. I've never seen the show. I've only seen the TikToks. Listen, I'm lost too. But, you know, before we get into the lore, what's life?
What
How
have
you
we
doing?
been up to?
Yeah.
Let's start with Amanda. Give her first shot.
I feel like this is going to make a bad first impression because I'm going to be talking about folklore, and then my exciting thing happening this week is like very adulting. Is I'm refinishing cabinets. I promise I'm usually more interesting than this, but we have built-in cabinets in the living room, and they're like from like 1980, and I'm learning how to like cut right angles to like put the cabinets together, which is the worst like mental exercise is to both cut something like a specific length, but also cut it at a 45-degree angle. I have ruined so many pieces of wood learning to do this. But I think this morning I finally solved it. Like the equations are in my head. And...
Listen,
Okay.
Geometry does come in handy eventually, and don't dismiss the way that home renovation can be absolutely riveting.
So I'm very excited because once I finish putting on the aesthetic pieces, I get to paint it, and that's really more my forte. Is I want to do something crazy with it. I haven't decided what yet, but that's been my week is learning to do that.
Okay.
Learning to do some woodworking. That's fun.
All right.
Can't wait to own a home someday.
Yeah.
This is a nice project. I can't even go into all of the horrible things we've had to do since we bought the house. We've
told me a couple of them.
We've remodeled 2 bathrooms and replaced the roof, and I'm traumatized. But this has been a nice, calming project.
Yeah, you've got to
Don't
have
know
the
your
little
stuff.
wins. The little easy wins, anyway.
Okay. What about
What
you?
about you,
Lisa?
Varun?
Oh, I will go, sure. So, pop culture-wise, I rewatched a chunk of the Bleach anime because they're actually bringing it back this year in October. And I'm like, man, I invested a bunch of time in that crap back in the day. And I absolutely remember why I dropped off of that because it's like Full Metal Alchemist sort of situation where they were releasing the anime pretty close to the manga. So there were tons of times where like the story's going. Oh, let's stop. Do this filler arc that's set before the thing you were seeing and has no bearing on what's going on, but we need time, so we're just gonna vamp for like a couple weeks. And then toward the end, the anime just becomes like the first 4 minutes is opening, the next 4 minutes is recapping the end of the last episode, and then it goes on to like new material. I can absolutely see why I hated the show toward the end. The story itself, like if you read the Bleach manga, is pretty good. Like overall, it's a pretty good story. But the anime kind of doesn't do it justice. One, because they have to censor a bunch of stuff because it's on TV. But also, yeah, the production problems of just being too close to the manga and not having the material just screw it all up, mess up the pacing a lot. But yeah, so I did that. I actually watched a bit of the show that I'd never seen before, the Fullbring arc. That's the last one. Bleach fans know what I'm talking about, because I literally thought that was filler, but no, that's an actual part of the story. And then me and Nova finished watching The Golden Palace, which is the follow-up to The Golden Girls, and it's not as good because they don't have B. Arthur in there. She's just like, I'm going to be in 2 episodes, and that's it. Even though there are other episodes that like directly reference her and like things that had happened. Like, nope, she's not in them at all. And yeah, that was the one and only season of that where, and I think I mentioned this last time, Lisa. It's got the 3 remaining Golden Girls, but then it also has Cheech Marin and a very young Don Cheadle who will do whatever he can to get his shirt off in that show. It's like, look at me, 20-something John Cheadle, just running around without a shirt. So we did that, and I'm working on a Gundam model for a contest coming up.
Ooh.
It's the real grade Hainu Gundam, which again, Gundam fans are gonna be like, God damn it, how did they get one of those? Because I have a hookup. And I'm also getting the expansion, the Hyper Mega Bazooka Launcher, which again probably sounds like gibberish to all of you. But it's a giant gun. Which is, I believe,
like it would be a giant gun. If you were to tell me I've got a hyper mega bazooka launcher, I'd be like, is that a gun?
Yes.
Or some bubble gum.
It is
I can see that.
It is a kit for a gun that is larger than the mobile suit itself. And I'm gonna get that one, and I'm gonna win that fucking contest. So that is where I'm at. What about you,
Put
Lisa?
some like terrain on it and stuff. Oh boy, it's the same song and dance with me every time. I've been working. I just got confirmation that I'm gonna continue working for another 6 months, which is fun and good because I love money. And yeah, no, it's a fun time.
I mean, last time, episode or 2 ago, you talked about Earthsea, and you just went off on that for a little while.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I found it's just we'll have to make that a whole thing. I can't get into that.
Yeah, that's gonna be its own
thing. But I've been listening to audiobooks, just absolutely tearing through them. What have I listened to?
Hasn't the Vox Machina show come out?
Oh my God, The Legend of Vox Machina. I don't want to talk about that. If I start talking about that, I'm gonna get very annoying.
I'm throwing you chum, Lisa, and you're just like, no.
I will say, well, I have stuff to talk about. Listen, let me get there.
Okay.
I will say, Legend of Vox Machina is very good. I enjoyed it personally, as a Vox Machina enjoyer. Those are my children, and I'm like very happy to see them doing their thing. But there are 1,000,001 people talking about it, so like I don't need to add my voice into that. I did watch on Netflix. There's a show which is also a podcast adaptation called Archive 81. It's a bit of an ooky spooky joint situation. It's like this guy who's like he like archives and repairs old cassette tapes and like videotapes, and he gets hired by this like shady corporation to like restore. That's the word I was looking for. Restoration. So he's hired to restore this like cache of videotapes from this building that burnt down, and then like as it goes along, it like there's occult stuff and there's a demon and the girl and blah 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 and weird timey-wimey dream nonsense. It's good. It's a good show. Good soundtrack. The main actor, I cannot recall his name, but he's very good. He's very expressive. He does like his sort of it's one of those shows where like part of the plot is that like the main character is like clear, like we see that he's seeing some very fucked up insane shit, but like everyone around him is just like, are you okay? You seem like you're going insane. And everyone's just kind of gaslighting him about it. Like, and I kind of I kind of eat that stuff up, I'm not gonna lie. So it's a good show. I recommend it. It's a pretty quick watch. I think it's only 10 episodes. Something like that. 8 or 10 episodes. Pretty good. Good stuff. I think there's going to be a second season. They set it up as if there's going to be a second season. I don't know. I kind of hope there's a second season.
I think that's a lot of shows these days. They just kind of always leave that little teaser of, could be a continuation. Like Good Omens, even though they finished the entire story.
That's definitely the Netflix model of like, we'll make a season 1 and then we'll leave it a little open-ended, and then if people want it, then we'll bring it back for as many seasons as people will watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in some cases, Netflix will just greenlight multiple seasons of a thing before the first one even comes out. And then something like Cowboy Bebop, the live action comes out, and it's like, oh, let's see how this does. Canceled immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. What else have I read/listened to? Oh, I listened to a bunch of it's another Netflix adaptation, Shadow and Bone, that series by Lee Bardugo.
Oh, that was good.
I read/listened to. I'm just gonna say read because it's easier, even though we're all acknowledging that I don't read. I just listen to audiobooks. I don't have time to read. Don't ask me. I read, I think, the first book and like most of the second book, and I'm gonna go in and watch the show, but it makes me a little sad to say it, but the main, like the world is very interesting, but the main character and her like love triangle nonsense is very, very annoying. I don't live for it. I don't live for it.
I hate
but
that.
Lee Bardugo has another series that only has one book out called Ninth House, and that one's really good. That one I recommend. And then another book by another author that has the number 9 in the title, Giddy in the Ninth, and that one also very good. Another recommend. That one's about necromancers. There's a lot of weird shit going on that one. Also very good. And now I'm listening to The Fellowship of the Ring as narrated by Andy Serkis. And
Ooh, that would be great.
Nice.
yeah, he does a great job. It's very good.
He's like the perfect actor. He's phenomenal in everything he does.
Yeah, no, he's great.
Getting reacquainted.
Yeah, that's all
for
the stuff I've been
Amazon show.
consuming lately. Oh, the Amazon. Yeah. Oh, I mean, okay. I'm scared. But I'm also excited.
The preview didn't look great. I really want to like it.
A lot of CG
but the preview, I was
backgrounds.
like,
Yeah, I'm nervous. I will say I'm nervous about it. I'm gonna give it a chance. I see that they're trying to do something different. Like in like the character poster previews that they put out, like there's one that I think she's like a dwarven princess or something, and like it's already giving us a feel for like the design aesthetic, because like that's kind of what I look at like immediately when I'm looking at this kind of stuff is like I'm looking at the production design, because that's what my brain is apparently built for. And like in the known trilogy, the known adaptations, the dwarves are Art Deco and the elves are Art Nouveau. I'm sorry.
That's where your brain
just looked at
goes.
me. He's like, "Oh, you're talking about this."
Yeah.
So the dwarves are Art Deco and the elves are Art Nouveau. But in the posters that we're seeing coming out, like the dwarves are Klimt, who's a symbolist painter. You've probably seen the painting The Kiss, where it's this kind of like golden, weird kind of surrealist kind of thing, and that's the aesthetic. That if that's like the artistic reference that they're going for the dwarves, that's really interesting. Like nobody cares about this, but like in that picture she's wearing the dress that she's wearing, it's what we call like a Fortuny gown, which is named after this designer, something Fortuny, I do not remember, but he was known for these like very delicately pleated fabrics, so much that like now it's called like Fortuny silk. It's and it was like made to like when you look at it initially, you might instinctually say like, oh, that's elven fabric, because it's got this very like watery, flowy kind of aspect to it. But Fortuny literally made that fabric and made his gowns inspired by like Greek statues. So if you're going in like a statue direction, it makes perfect sense for the dwarves. And I don't know, I just my little like costume design, production design brain just like lit up. So like that alone made me really excited, just to like, I don't care if the dialogue's good. I don't care if anything else is good. I just want some eye candy.
It looks nice.
Like, if there's one
That's all I care about.
thing about Lord of the Rings is I want eye candy. And I think at least costume-wise, they're gonna deliver on that, just based on like the character posters. That's how. Yeah, I don't disagree that the trailer was made me a little nervous.
That's how I felt about Game of Thrones. Is I was like, I don't care if the last season's bad, as long as they keep hand embroidering Cersei's dresses, then like I'll just keep watching it.
Yes, exactly. Like, oh my god, the smocking on all of Daenerys's costumes.
Oh my gosh,
like, delicate little cartridge pleating on. Ugh, don't get me started. Don't get me started.
I found your guys' thing. All right, cool.
Yeah, Amanda. Classes in session. What are we learning about today?
So you asked me to bring you the lore of the Forgotten Realms, but before I dive into that, I'm gonna bring you back to the beginning of time, to the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. Because if I'm being honest, unless I explain how Dungeons and Dragons was created, a lot of the Forgotten Realms doesn't make any sense. So welcome to lesson 1. Context.
And yes, for the listeners' benefit, Lisa and I don't actually know a lot about the Forgotten Realms lore, because we usually play in homebrew games or like pre-made modules that kind of only look at a little sliver of it. So Amanda, being the expert that you are, take us through.
I'm going to start with the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. So that kind of starts with the medieval miniature combat games of old. So if you imagine like the Victorian era and there's a gentleman in a suit leaning over like that huge table and he's got like little like American revolutionaries. No, I guess the timeline doesn't make sense, but he's got little soldiers and he's like moving them around and there's another gentleman at the other end and then they're pretending to shoot each other. Like that is like the foundation of the game that existed before Dungeons and Dragons, is basically a gentleman would reenact wars with small like tin figures. And that was popular for probably several decades. And it like created this small community of people who did medieval miniature combat fighting. And one of those people was Jeff Perrin. His friends used to get together to play this miniature game. And him and his friend Gary Gygax got together so often that they found like the medieval fantasy was getting a little boring. So they invented a fantasy supplement to go on top of their medieval battles. So instead of just like, my French army is going to fight the German army, it's like, well, my French army is going to fight a dragon. So they made it like just a little bit more interesting.
So D&D started out as like a homebrew unto itself, onto like wargaming.
Yes, absolutely. So the game that they created was called Chainmail. And it was like this medieval fantasy game. Again, you would fight like a big army against a creature. But what happened was when Dame Arneson came in, he wanted to play that same game, but he was like, what if I was just like one of these soldiers instead of like all of the soldiers? It's like, and I can totally imagine that happening. It's like you sit down to play this war game, but for some reason you're really attached to like this one character. You're like, that's my favorite figure, and I want to just play with that figure. So what happened was that Gary Gygax and Dave Arison met, and they were like, what if we made a game together? What if we took my fantasy supplement and we took your single player mechanics, and then we kind of made something where we had a singular player play in like a fantasy world. And D&D in its first iteration was born. And it wasn't really a game by itself yet. It was just kind of like rules that went on top of the game that they had made previously called Chainmail. So you bought Chainmail, which was a book, and then you bought like a little set of pamphlets, and that was like how to play D&D with one character, with like their, what they called at the time, hero. And that they developed out of their garage because they tried to sell it to a company, and they're like, this isn't this will never sell. So they founded TSR, and then they like printed out these pamphlets in their garage and sold them. They must have sold them through mail-in, because that was like pre-internet.
I think so.
Yeah, so that you could like order this pamphlet.
Yeah, I think it was in comic books and stuff like that. I think I spoke to a guy at our local store, and he's from that generation. So yeah, it would be like mail-in or ads in comic books, and yeah, you just, or if you're lucky, like a bookstore, and then just find them and stumble on these things.
You'd tear out that little leaflet in the middle of the comic book and then fill in your address in the little squares and then send it off. And then 2 months later, you'd get a little box in the mail with all of their little pamphlets. But that was sort of the amalgamation of different things together to create this like add-on. And then right after what they call the white box edition, the original D&D, then they made basic D&D, which was the same game but simpler, and advanced D&D, which was the same game but with more rules. And then after that, they made Advanced 2nd Edition, and then Advanced was really the version that they kept. So 3rd Edition, 4th Edition, and then today, 5th Edition. And I'll talk a little bit more about like the differences between those and how they affected the lore in a bit. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention like the influences behind Dungeons and Dragons. And this brings us to the Tolkien controversy. You can't look at Dungeons and Dragons and not see similarities between Tolkien and the fantasy. And what's actually really funny is Gary Gygax, one of the original creators of Dungeons and Dragons, actually doesn't like Lord of the Rings. What? He said it was really boring and he didn't enjoy it. But when he was building the game, again, he had a bunch of people who were really into playing medieval miniature games, and they liked Lord of the Rings. So he's like, really personally, myself, I'm more of a Conan the Barbarian fan. But because of my friends, I had to put these Lord of the Ring elements into it. And so the first iteration of D&D has things like hobbits and ents and trolls, but you'll notice that every edition after that, those are omitted because the Tolkien estate came by and was like, hey man, you can't do that. And he's like, fine.
Like a cease and desist order in the 70s.
Right. In Gary Gygax's defense, like Tolkien didn't invent elves, so like a lot of the things that he included in his fantasy was also just like folklore, which is kind of prevalent throughout everything. But he was definitely inspired by Lord of the Rings, and he admits to that. And before I jump into Forgotten Realms, I should mention a little bit about the other campaign settings. Before Forgotten Realms came out, they had a campaign setting called Blackmoor. After Blackmoor, they had Greyhawk, and then after Greyhawk, they had Dragonlance. That brings us from 1975 to 1982. But after Dragonlance came the campaign setting to end all campaign settings, which is the Forgotten Realms, which is like
Before you go on, isn't Dragonlance also from another series though? Am I misremembering that? Isn't there like a book series that's set in Dragonlance?
Yes, absolutely. So what TSR did is they came out with Blackmoor as a campaign setting. It was kind of like this sci-fi campaign setting, but it wasn't what they were going for. They created Greyhawk after that. It was still kind of like a great place to play in, but it wasn't as full of a world. They were both very like dungeon focused. So what they did is they went out to Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, which are two authors, and they sat down with a bunch of their friends. They played a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and then Weiss and Hickman wrote a book series based off of their game. And they created the world of Dragonlance off of that custom campaign setting that they had created for those players, which was famous. It blew up, and it was first. Like, yes, they did.
And isn't I don't know if you know about this one, but isn't Eberron kind of similar to that?
Eberron came out much later, but
late.
yes. That one was released in 2002, but actually Eberron, okay, I'm going to tangent a little bit and I apologize. But Eberron was really cool because not only was it similar to that, but they had a fantasy setting contest for $100,000. Yeah, and people submitted their ideas, and Eberron won, which is like if you haven't heard of Eberron, it's like this dark magical steampunk fantasy second. It's not like steampunk. It's more like, actually, it's a little more like Arcane, that new League of Legends show that just came out.
Yeah.
It was released around 3rd edition. And yeah, the creator of that earned $100,000 for his submission, which I would argue is almost a little bit of money because I'm sure they sold more books than that. But I guess that was the trade-off. But Dragonlance was their flagship product before Forgotten Realms came out. And actually, Dungeons & Dragons never really sunsets any of their campaign settings. So if you're interested in the world of Dragonlance or Greyhawk, all of their books are still available. In fact, they supported a lot of these until like the mid to early 2000s. And again, they're not sunset. They just, sometimes it takes a while for the next book to come out. And they've really shifted more to focus on the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, and speaking of Dragonlance, I know there was a little bit of a fracas a couple years ago between like the writers and Wizards about kind of rights to Dragonlance and like to either make more books or to make more like campaign setting stuff. Do you remember hearing about that? I know.
No.
I think it got because I believe it's the original writers wanting to make some new stuff, and they were totally in with Wizards to just keep the train going. But then there was some kind of rights issue that came up, so all that kind of got stopped for a while, and it looked like there wasn't going to be any new Dragonlance stuff. Period. But I think they finally kind of worked it out, so there should be some coming at some point in the future.
That would be excellent. If I love Dragonlance. That's where I started, as I picked up some Dragonlance novels when I was in high school. So it's a personal favorite of mine. But actually, the Dungeons and Dragons company has a bit of a problem with their campaign settings in that they have so many. They have 27 official campaign settings. And some of them are, like you meant, there's a lot of licensing issues. There's a lot of like, we made the game, but you made the additional content. So how much of it do you own and how much of it do we own? And also having 27 officially licensed products means that like not everyone gets the support that they wish they had. So like, if you play in the Forgotten Realms, like, oh my goodness, do you have content? But like, imagine if you started playing in like 1975 and like Blackmoor is where your characters are from and they really resonate with that area. Well, you're going to have to wait 10, 15 years between books because they don't come out that often anymore. So there's a lot of people, and you see this on Kickstarter and stuff. People will make like unofficial campaign settings, and then sometimes like Wizard will buy those companies. So it's just all a mess of like rights and different modules and books. But there's some of that that's actually really beautiful because it creates this like world of limitless opportunity where you can kind of create anything, and there's content everywhere. But like I mentioned, after Blackmoor, Greyhawk, and Dragonlance, we entered the world of Forgotten Realms. And Forgotten Realms was created by Ed Greenwood. He says he started creating Forgotten Realms when he was 7. He really liked Greek mythology. Not Greek mythology. He really liked mythology in general. And he liked to imagine that all of the gods lived in the same place. And what would that place be like if the Greek gods and the Norse gods and the Egyptian gods kind of all came from this plane?
I laugh just because I listen to a lot of people talk about campaign or like setting creation online just to get ideas for our podcast and games that I'm running. And one of the things that a lot of creators nowadays just kind of will ding people for or maybe rail against is all of the different aesthetics or all the different mythologies just being all in one world without a lot of explanation, which to be fair, if like a 17-year-old in high school is coming up with this and just kind of mashing everything together, they may not have a great rationale for why this is the way they is, other than like we think it's cool. But that's where your boy Ed Greenwood started out.
Yes. It didn't end there. There are definitely Baldur's Gate, being Baldur being Norse mythology, and then there's definitely like Greek influences. So, but a lot of his gods are inspired by gods or even just other folkloric stories. But that's everything at the end of the day. But he started playing Dungeons and Dragons in 1975, and by 1979 he was writing articles for Dragon magazine. Basically doing like the YouTube version of today of being like, hey, this is how I make my campaign settings, and these are some stories that I've done, and here's some recommendations. And then the Dungeons and Dragons approached him to be like, hey, you seem to have a really thorough idea of your world. Would it be okay if we purchased like your campaign setting and then help you develop it? And he was like, yeah, I'd absolutely be into that. So he delivered like several filing cabinets worth of documents.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that they had to like sort through. And his module for the Forgotten Realms came out for 2nd edition. His was like their officially backed campaign setting. He moved them from 1st edition, which, like I said, was a little more dungeon focused, into like a full world for their 2nd edition, which I think is why 2nd edition is some people's favorite, because it really moved out of like some of this linear storytelling to having like this entire universe to play in.
And when we say, when you're creating your own setting, don't write a book, you're not getting paid by Wizards to do it.
Yeah.
So...
But I mean, if this proved anything, maybe if it's really good, you will be.
But if it's not, which is a lot of the case, you've wasted a lot of your time. Start small and then grow from there.
I mean, if you're having fun, whatever, but just adjust your expectations.
If you're writing a book, write a book. Just write a book.
Yeah, no, that is the thing. There are some people who I have had to tell, like, okay, you're doing an amazing job, you're doing a lot, but it sounds like what you actually want to do is write a novel.
You don't want people to interact with your characters, you just want to write the characters, and that's totally fine.
Right.
And like I mentioned, Wizards of the Coast has 27 campaign settings, so you don't have to, if you don't want to homebrew, you don't have to. There's lots of places for your world to exist in.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a lot of stuff to steal from.
Yes.
I am a fan of the, like, you make a hodgepodge of your favorite parts of these 27 worlds.
Which actually, that's a great point, Lisa, because that's exactly what Wizards of the Coast does. Is like they started the Forgotten Realms in 1986, and their most recent books came out this year, so that's 2022, which means that they've been writing books for a very long time. And some of the things that they wrote in their books in 1986 don't align well with our current culture and values.
Yep.
So they evolve a lot over time, which means that they both edit their content and then they omit things between this when it came out in 2nd edition and 5th edition today. So I'm gonna tell a story today about the creation of the universe, but I do want to be very clear that this is my interpretation of their story. Is this has existed again since 2nd edition, so they've modified it a little bit and it has evolved over time. I try to read as much content as is available and then add my own perspective, which is something else kind of cool that Wizards does. Is whenever you listen to their folklore or read their books, it's always written from the perspective of someone who lives in their world. So if you are listening to a story about the beginning of time, it's from the perspective of a dragon or of an elf.
Mordenkainen or Xanathar or
right.
What the book is about.
Which is secretly brilliant.
I really enjoy that. That is definitely an aspect of the, like, when the source books and the adventures come out, part of what I'm looking at them for, more than just, like, what can I take from this to use in our games, is also, I just enjoy the, like, actual writing aspect of them, of, like, how the different characters have these interpretations and, like, in what ways are these, like, subjective and objective, like, their opinions? These characters' personal opinions are, like, being reflected here, like with Fizzban.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, I do like the way that Wizards does their books. In that same vein, I hate the way that White Wolf does the vampire books for the exact same thing, because, and I think I don't know if I mentioned it to you on the show, Lisa, but I got the vampire books, and I've just been reading through it, just trying to, like, how does the vampire system work? And the first, like, quarter of the book is just random stories from the world told from different characters' points of view, which get you into the lore, but also, if you want to figure out how to play the game, you have to skip that first chunk of the book to actually get to any sort of mechanics. So it's interesting to read. Like some of it's like a letter from like the 1800s or something, talking about how someone in that day would kind of understand the process of transforming into a vampire versus like a log from like a strike team or something of like anti-vampire like mercenaries or something set in the modern day, and how they kind of discuss it. And that's interesting, but also the way they lay it out is kind of infuriating because yeah, you think you're listening to one story or one perspective going through the thing, and you realize, oh wait, this is something completely new. Oh, this is also something completely different. Oh, I've jumped back in time now. It's talking about all these different vampire clans and all that, but I have no context for any of these things because I have no idea what the game is.
Yeah.
What am I doing here? And I like how the D&D books, especially the modern ones, kind of roll that into explaining, like, if it's a settings book, you know, okay, this is the setting, these are any sort of mechanics we have around it. Or if it's a new like source book of these are the different classes and this is what they mean in the world, and then go into what they actually are like on paper. So I like how I like how Wizard kind of mixes it and has a good balance versus the White Wolf formula is just like infuriating, at least to me, to read.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy the how they'll have like the extra little like yellow text boxes or whatever it is like on the page, where it's like you'll have the stat block and you'll have the like basic practical information, but then you'll have this like random blurb that's clearly just like this narrator's opinion. And that's fun because that is like I feel like that's a very natural, organic way to build in world building.
I also feel like it's a wonderful loophole because Wizards knows that the content is going to have to change over time. So instead of saying like, "Hey, we went back and we changed history," they can just say that person was wrong, and this is the perspective of another person who, in time, may also be wrong. or like I'll maybe I'll get to the story in a little bit, but how the orcs and the elves view their history is absolutely in direct conflict with each other. Mm-hmm. So they'll tell the same exact story and it'll have two different endings, and both of them are what they believe is true, and Wizards will never say who was right, which allows you to play your game like however you want.
Yeah, and it's a fun way of like showing how in a way, it kind of reflects those like war game roots, because like war games, you are taking into account like human nature and how people interact with each other and how like different cultures interact with each other, and how in a war and after a war, the different sides and different factions will tell the story different, and the history will be interpreted differently. And it's a fun way of going like of showing that this is a three-dimensional world where everybody sees things in different ways. It's there's a word for it. It's a very big word. I can't remember it. I'll get back.
Which is a very long way of me saying that I'm going to tell a story, and maybe I'll be hopping on to a few more episodes to tell a few other stories. But regardless of what I say, if you're playing in the Forgotten Realms and your DM disagrees with me, your DM is always right. It is their world. They get to decide their own perspective of events. This is just what I've gleaned from my reading. And you know what? I'm just another voice in the book. I'm another yellow box, so I in time can be wrong. Which brings me to the creation of the universe. Are you guys ready?
You have the floor.
Let's go.
Okay. So in the beginning, there was nothing, which is a difficult concept to imagine because darkness didn't exist yet. So there was a nothing that was not light or dark. It was nothing. And in this nothing, there was chaos. So this energy, like the pre-concept of creation, and there were primordials. And primordials are things like the monstrous embodiment of a hurricane or of a volcano. Think of like the Titans from the beginning of Hercules. So, and they existed on all of these dead worlds. Don't ask me how. There can be nothing and dead worlds simultaneously, but this is how things were. You're gonna have to roll with it. Is these Primordials went from dead world to dead world, and they just kind of destroyed things. So there was like this natural force of destruction, and then nothing else. Over time, the chaos kind of convalesced into like a single moment of balance. And in that balance, the first two gods were born. They were Shar, the goddess of darkness, and Selûne, the goddess of light. And because they were polar opposites to each other, they were in perfect balance. And they kind of created a balance that didn't exist in this kind of universe filled with chaos. Because the universe was so chaotic and the Primordials were just destroying everything left and right, they kind of wanted to create their own like safe haven space. So they created the world of Abir Terrell, which is the planet that Faerun is settled on.
I never knew that. Holy shit. I never knew that actually had a name.
It gets more confusing in that, because nothing in Forgotten Realms is like a single sentence. It's a sentence with an asterisk and then like 3 footnotes. But yes, the original planet was Bir Torel. And when they created the Earth, the goddess Shantea was born, who is the goddess of nature. And something interesting happens in Forgotten Realms folklore is whenever like a new god is created, it's like a combination of the previous gods. So because Shar is the goddess of darkness and Selûne is the goddess of light, their child was kind of neutral. And she was like this earth deity. Think of like Mother Earth. And she created oceans and sky, but she couldn't create life because there was no heat. Okay, which is also a little confusing because Selûne is the goddess of light, but not the goddess of heat. We'll
Which
ignore
is a
the fact.
thing.
Yeah. Yes.
If you're thinking of it scientifically, those are 2 different things.
Yes, she did create the stars, but she didn't make the sun.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right.
So in order to put life on Abir Terrell, she reached into the realm of Muspelheim, which is a realm of fire from Norse mythology, and she plucked out a single flame and threw it into the sky. But she kind of did this without like clearing it with Shar first, and Shar is the goddess of darkness, so they had a marital dispute. So they were very upset with each other. Shar tried to put out the light, and Selûne is trying to save it so that life can exist in Aber Terrell, which has like this double importance, because when the sun existed in the sky for the first time ever, the god Lathander was born, who is the god of the sun. And I think that that's cute, because he's the god of the sun, but he's also the first boy to ever exist. So he's like the sun god, but also like the sun god. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's very cute, right? So Shar's like, I'm gonna kill him, and Selûne's like, please don't do that. He's my firstborn son. So they get into a fight, and from their original conflict, the gods of war, disease, murder, trickery, and death are born, and they kind of now exist in the universe. Shar and Selûne fight, and they fight for millennia over all of the universe, until eventually Selûne takes a part of herself, like her magical essence, out of her body, and then throws it at Shar. It strikes Shar in the chest, and then tears from Shar the magical essence in her, and that flies out into the ether, and those 2 magical essences combine together to create Mystra, who is the goddess of magic. And Mystra stands up and she's like, you guys gotta calm down, because in very like Pandora's box fashion, like nothing you can do can undo what has been done. So if you then send Lathander back now, the universe is already unbalanced, because the only reason that it was in perfect harmony before was because Shar and Selûne were like evenly matched. But now that war, disease, murder, trickery, death all exist, you can't undo those things. So they kind of calm down, and they have this truce. But because Selûne had pulled the sun from the sky, Shantea was able to create life on Abertrell, and that is like the beginning of the universe of the Forgotten Realms and the birth of the gods.
Interesting. So I know I've heard the name Shar a couple times in like the Faerun mythology stuff. Like, they're Saloon and Shar are kind of like the two OGs. Like, does anyone still worship them like in the current day, or are they like so old that no one even remembers them?
Saloon is the goddess of the moon now. She's less attributed to light. So I think that like werewolves and people that do like transformative magic worship Saloon. And then Shar, and I have so many problems with this. Shar is the goddess of darkness, and they kind of portray her as like an evil, jealous woman, which isn't my favorite archetype. And she's like the goddess of like darkness and shadows. And that's something that happened a lot at the beginning of D&D, and I think they're moving away from it, is like confusing darkness and evil. Both with like the gods, but also with some of the races as well, is the idea of Shar and Saloon being polar opposites, is one is dark and one is light, one is active and one is passive. And I think it's really easy to make that leap to like, oh, one is good and one is evil, but they exist in a time like before evil. So they're more like, Shar's evil in the same way like a volcano is evil. Like, people don't always like darkness, but the volcano isn't exploding with evil intentions. That's just what it does. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Her more modern interpretation is like shadow and assassins and thieves and stuff like that. So I haven't read all of her history though. So maybe something traumatic happens. Maybe she has a switch and then decides to murder all peoples.
Okay.
But something cool that they do with Forgotten Realms is a lot of their stories have like a context. So the story I just told you is from the War of Light and Dark, which is a book that is in Neverwinter. So if you are ever visiting Neverwinter in the Forgotten Realms, that story is on the shelf in a library somewhere over there.
Cool. So that's the creation of the universe and the creation of the world. So then, and I don't know if this is opening up the next can of worms, but like, how do all different races get there?
I would love to talk to you about that next time.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect spot.
It's a different, like
Okay.
you said, can of worms.
Okay, and then so we've got a couple gods and goddesses running around. Does the introduction of all the races kind of create them as well? Or, because I know like Bahamut and Tiamat, they existed way before, right?
From the perspective of dragons, they would say that Bahamut and Tiamat existed before the creation of Shar and Saloon because they were primordials.
That's the one I'd heard, yeah.
But that story is new. The original story, which, I mean, I can touch on this more in depth, is that Bahamut and Tiamat were created from Io, who was a god that's created after this. So I guess it depends on your perspective.
Okay. And the very like polytheistic theme of Faerun and D&D in general, you kind of touched on it. Is there ever a situation, because there's obviously retcons and changes later on, is there ever a situation where gods exist but then they lose their standing as gods and then they no longer exist or something?
In the beginning of the gods, you usually get new gods because old gods are either injured or that they divide into divide into themselves, or they have children, and then they lose an aspect of their immortality that way. They call their godly essence a profile. So if I was the god, for example, Saloon, I'm the god of light. When the god of the sun is born, and that's like her son, she loses a bit of that portfolio. In the future iterations, God will die. They'll get killed. They'll lose their powers, or they'll give them away. So they do shift a lot.
Okay, cool. And then, would you be able to, like where do all the kind of real world mythologies get tied into this?
Into this one, I mean, there's no like source book. It's not like when you read this, there's like a note from Ed Greenwood, and he's like, I was thinking about that at the time. So there are a few obvious analogies. Like Shar and Saloon are very yin and yang, so very like Taoism. The concept that the universe didn't exist and that there was balance, like that is absolutely fundamentally yin and yang. He didn't create that concept. There's a little bit of scientific theory and that there was chaos and then there was balance. Some of the versions of the creation of the universe start with an explosion, so like hinting at the Big Bang. And then, like I said, the Pandora's box with the first ever fight leading to war, murder, death, trickery, and disease. Like that's very Garden of Eden, but also Pandora's box.
Pandora's box.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, so like, how does like Thor and the Norse gods and the Greek gods and whatnot show up?
So I'll talk about that in a little bit, but basically, Abiotrel exists on the prime material plane, which is fundamentally where I'll be focusing most of the stories. But the other planes of existence still exist. So Olympus and Valhalla, I think, are on the same plane, and they have their own history, and it's just the history of whatever that religion or mythology was. So think of like Norse mythology. Have you familiar with like the Yggdrasil, the world tree? Yeah, Forgotten Realms adopted that, and they have their own like planes lore of different areas, and some of them overlap, and some of them are connected to each other. And I'll touch a little bit about the creation on that later. But Muspelheim, which I mentioned before, the realm of fire, has always existed. And that's Norse.
Existed. Yeah. Okay. Because I was going to say, the planes of existence, like they're elemental planes. And they're just, the plane of fire is just all fire. If a person went there, they'd immediately die because there's nothing to fire there.
Yes, exactly.
And those sort of things just always existed.
If you're asking a person that exists in the Forgotten Realms universe, yes. If you're stepping out of game, they have this concept of Ao, who is the god of all gods. His history is that no one knows about him, but basically Ao is Ed Greenwood. So if anything's existed and they don't have a foundational story for it, they'll be like, oh, that was created by Ao in order to balance things.
The one above all in Marvel Comics. The hand wave of like, this is Jack Kirby, and what he says goes. Go.
Right.
Yeah. It's the don't worry about it.
So a lot of history would be like Ao did this or Ao did that, but it is important to remember that like the people on Abbott Trail don't really know about Ao. Like there might be like 3 priests of Ao ever in history. It's like a secret.
Interesting. Okay, that's cool. That's cool to know.
But I didn't talk about all the details.
Ao is different from Io.
Yes, Ao is the god of all gods. Io is the god of dragons.
I knew that one.
Just okay. Yeah. Again, everything has an asterisk and 3 footnotes. But I don't have all the details in what I talked about today. If you are interested in more information about the creation of the universe, I would recommend 2 books. The Forgotten Realms Campaign Guide, which is 4th edition, and The Grand History of the Realms, which also came out in I think 3.5. They're both very good, and they talk about both the creation of the universe and also history in the Forgotten Realms in general. Some of the players' handbooks will mention things, but it's usually just a paragraph, where both of those are entire books based on history.
You gave me some links. I'll put them in the description when we post this up.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah. So the last thing you mentioned was Mistral. So she's the god of all magic?
Yes. So I'll talk a bit about the difference between Mistral and Mistra later, but basically Mistral evolves over time, and she is the goddess of magic. Actually, a lot of the Forgotten Realms lore, a lot of the novels, if you read any of them, are based around Mistra. People really want to be the goddess of magic.
I assume so.
She dies a few times. Sorry, spoilers. I apologize.
I mean, she'll be back. Like...
No, I'll talk about it. Footnote.
Okay, no, this is super informative because I knew a little bit of this stuff, but my main universe creation just basically started with 5th edition, where Tiamat and Bahamut are kind of talked about as being big primordials before the universe beings, but that's a retcon apparently.
that is actually, that came out in the most recent book. So it isn't that it's not right. It's that is the perspective of dragons, and they could be right. But also there's like other stories that exist and that could also be right. And you just don't know, because you're never going to sit down with a god and find out.
Yeah.
And even if you did, they could lie to you.
Yeah, they could lie to you. That's what I wanted to bring up with the polytheistic thing of just like the very Greek way of how the gods are portrayed, of like some of the gods are just assholes. Like they could just lie and be jealous, and like they're not like super great sometimes.
Yeah, they all have their own motivations, and the whims of mortals are not important to them. So
yeah. The gods are it's just some guy.
or a crazy 5-headed dragon lady from hell. which I just bring up because in our gaming store group we actually did just fight Tiamat. We're level 6, and it's obviously not, you know, the true Tiamat, but like her avatar on the material plane, and holy crap is fighting Tiamat hard.
Yeah.
Immediately just like but yeah, fighting Tiamat, oh boy, because there's a portal, and the geography of this portal matters because it was, I assumed, like a pool on the ground, and Tiamat was just climbing out of hell on this floating island. I was incorrect. It's like a vertical portal. She's walking out. So as we're trying to do things to stop the portal from bringing Tiamat out, our efforts, my efforts maybe specifically, make things worse. And instead of just a head or two of Tiamat poking out, it's the entire body. So one of our barbarians, he has a Vorpal Greatsword. We're level 16 at this point, so we're pretty strong. And he crits Tiamat, which normally critting with a Vorpal weapon would just chop off a head immediately. But Tiamat's a god. Doesn't work like that. It just does a shit ton of damage. So he does a crap load of damage. Tiamat just turns around, and he's a barbarian. Bear Totem can like really tank some stuff. Immediately kills him. Just turns all of her attacks on him. One of our biggest damage dealers just immediately dead. Dead. Out. And my character, who is very tanky, armor artificer, super tanky. I can't do shit against Tiamat because everyone else had Hero's Feast except me. So they're all immune to poison. They're all immune to fear and all of that. I'm not. And you have to get like a nat... I had to roll a nat 20 to not be afraid of Tiamat with her frightful presence. So...
Oh my god.
Slight tangent. Yes, I had to run away from Tiamat. But I mentioned floating islands. So Tiamat's on this island, wrecking shop. Like, absolutely just obliterating our party. People are getting close to dying. And I have to run away. So I run away to an island above where everyone's fighting. And I'm like, okay, I can't see Tiamat anymore, so I can do something now. Given the incorrect geography, I was thinking of, I was like, let me dispel magic on this floating island and make it fall on Tiamat. And the DM was like, that can work, but all of these floating islands you're on are connected. So if you do this, everyone will fall. The entire party is going to fall. And that's when we all realized, oh, we're all thinking of this incorrectly. Like, no, it wasn't just me. So I changed it to do my highest level shatter. He let me take a mulligan on that because we misunderstood kind of like how things were set up. So highest level shatter on this island, which isn't a huge island, but it's big enough to house a couple people. So I blew up the entire island and let that rain on Tiamat for a couple hundreds of just bludgeoning damage. And even that like didn't kill her. Like, all together, we got her down to, like, less than half health, but she was still gonna murder us. But our whole goal was just push her back through the portal, back to the 9 hells, which we very barely did. God, slight tangent on just, like, fighting gods, but, like, you mentioned them there, of just, like, this happened last week, and I have to tell someone about it.
Yeah, Tiamat's no joke. She should be frightening.
Because, she's got legendary resistances, 5 of them. She's got 5 legendary actions, I believe. She's got immunity to all her elements. She can strike 5 times in a turn, multiple breath weapons, crap ton of HP. She's just, and she's gargantuan. So, like, most, like, repositioning things don't work on her because the cutoff is usually huge on that. Huge size. So anything gargantuan is, like, too big to move. It was dumb. It was like, the best thing that came out of it beyond our barbarian should have dying, but we were able to revivify him in literally the last round of initiative. Get to him, revivify him, use a diamond. Like, that was just luck. So that was good. He's still alive, just barely. But also I got the Mask of the Dragon Queen, which I got just by accident. By killing one of the top cultists and just, like, taking his mask and throwing it in the bag because it looked like a big, important magic thing. Get this away from here. And then I look at, I identify it, look at it afterward of just, like, what is this? It's the Mask of Tiamat, basically. So you wear it, and it gives you resistance to all 5 of her elements. You get legendary resistances, and you get all of the abilities of the other 5 dragon masks. So you can breathe underwater, you can burn things with a touch, you can do extra ice damage if you're low on health, and you can persuade dragons to just kind of do whatever you want. It's crazy. So, we're in a weird part of the game now. I have this big evil mask, but it's, like, super powerful. But, back to your point, Amanda, of just, like, gods. This is the type of shit we're talking about, of, like, creation of the universe. I really want to see if we do something with Bahamut as well, because, like, he's a single platinum dragon, right?
Yes, he is. Yes, he's the only platinum. Ooh, I'm gonna have to look that up. Okay. I'm gonna have to. I want to look up 2 things now. One, I've heard both that Io, the god that existed before, and Bahamut are both, like, the singular platinum dragons. Maybe they're the same dragon. But also, I don't know how Tiamat got into the 9 Hells, because she lives down there, but she didn't have to, and she didn't always. So I'm gonna look that. You've brought up 2 different things that I want to read.
She's mad, so she's just like, this is a nice place to be.
Yeah. Well, when I don't want to talk too much about this, but when Bahamut and Tiamat were originally created, they weren't enemies. Like, Tiamat wasn't evil and he wasn't good. They were just chromatic and metallic.
Interesting.
And I wonder when that happened and when she was like, I feel like I should live in hell. There's a lot. I mean, sometimes there's a great reason, but there's a lot, especially in early D&D, of just, like, the woman is evil, so
I get
because
a lot of
she
that.
is. So there may not be anything, but hopefully there is. Hopefully
because
there's a valid
jealousy.
reason. Yeah. Because women, am I right? Yeah.
Women be jealous.
Well, there are 2, and one of them has to be evil. So clearly, I mean, like,
Yeah.
her, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
no,
crazy how, like, that trope, it's, like, so easy, because it's so, like, we see it so often, and it's just, like, it's just so easy to fall into it.
Yeah.
For no reason other than, women be evil.
Women be shopping.
In their defense, I mean, this was written in the 70s and 80s, which wasn't a great time. and they are stepping back from it more and more as they write more content.
A bunch of dudes.
Yeah. Well, it's not necessarily overt. It's not great that all of the women are evil.
Yeah. And there is something to be said of, like, this is the era when they were like, women don't want to play our game. What do you mean?
Yeah.
And then
this is also
like, we do, and they're like, no, you don't. You're lying.
This is also the era where all of the books that came out had topless women on the front. Like, the barbarian lady has, like, 5 links of chainmail on her whole body. I don't know why women don't want to come hang out with us.
Yeah, it's a mystery. But that's definitely one of the things we want to go into more as you tell more stories here, because this is real good of just, like, changing perceptions over time. I assume in the next one we're going to talk more about the races. So the races in D&D, one, mirroring stuff that was in Tolkien, but also like real world stereotypes and how that kind of comes into play on some of these. Yeah, that's gonna be interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
But for now, Amanda, your pluggables.
Yeah.
Give us the
Yes.
Amanda lore.
Yes. So if you want to hear me talk about something completely different, you can check us out on the Taste of Dragons podcast. We talk about video games and sandwiches. We're drop new podcasts every Sunday. We have a Discord. We have an Instagram. We have all the doodly doos. You can check us out at Taste of Dragons everywhere.
Nice. Sandwiches. We got into it over like which fried chicken sandwich is the best.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
Popeyes.
The chicken sandwich wars? I
Yes.
agree.
And
Yeah, it's Popeyes.
99% I'll agree it's Popeyes, but they don't have Zaxby's down there. In
Oh,
South
that's okay.
Florida.
I mean, it's fine. You could be wrong, but it is Popeyes.
Zaxby's competes. They are in the conversation. They are.
First of all, there is a Zaxby's in West Palm Beach if you really
West
want
Palm Beach, an hour away from where we live. But all right.
Hey, listen, it's still South Florida.
Yes, it is still Zaxby's, South Florida. But I will say my only gripe with the Popeye sandwich is that sometimes you'll get one that has too much breading on it, so it's just bread. There's like very little, if not no meat, and then you just got bread on bread, and like that, I hate that because then it's just salt, bread, all that shit, but no meat to go to break it.
That does sound like the perfect sandwich to me, but I do get what you're saying.
Whereas
Thank you, Amanda. I was about to say, like, that sounds like it's only a problem to you.
Yes. Whereas Zaxby's they fixed the ratio. Like it's not a patty, but it's like a breast, but it's big enough, and the bread isn't big enough that it doesn't overwhelm you with too much bread on any single bite. Where Popeyes, I've had some where it's like giant chunk of chicken on one side and like a little sliver on the other side. That is my peeve. Like the thing that gets me when I get the sandwiches. I'm like, no, you've ruined it. Everything else is great, but now it's gone.
Incredible.
Yes, we're just bringing back the sandwich wars at this point.
Yeah, let's not rehash the sandwich wars.
All right.
So we will have links to the not at all required reading in the description, and we will see you next time for Now We've Got Gods. Now what?
That's the title of the next episode. Absolutely forgot to do our own plugs, Lisa.
I mean, they're already here. What are we plugging? They're already here.
Share it out to other people.
I mean, I guess. Yeah, tell your friends. Maybe the ones who are like, what the heck is D&D, you weird nerd, give me your lunch money. Just be like, hey, listen to these two weirdos talk about it, and maybe you want to join me on Sunday when I am running a game on Sunday.
Listen to us on YouTube and Spotify. If you're listening
Do all
there.
the interaction things, the likes and the shares and the comments.
Share, comment. All those things help us out.
Listen,
And
I don't care if you hate comment, just what matters is that you interact.
exactly. You just need interaction. That's all the algorithm cares about. Check our Twitter for a link tree if you've got some other place you want to listen to, and we'll put out like little polls and questions and stuff every now and again.
Oops All Dragons is a group effort. Our show is edited by Noel Hernandez, our theme was composed by Brendan Lyons, and our logo art is by Azif On Q. Links to more of their work and their social media will be in the show notes. Find us on YouTube and Spotify, and check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Oops All Dragons.